Max Verstappen has a whinge and is told to retire from Formula One. Aston Martin are rubbish and it causes an absolute tantrum from Fernando Alonso. Lewis Hamilton and Kim Kardashian break the internet again. We'll cover it all. This is the first week of testing review. This is View from Luffield. Let's go. Hello. Welcome to View from Luffield. Just me this week. As you can see, Phil is otherwise not available. So I'm going to be doing this one on my own. And today we're going to talk about what we learned from the first week of testing, official Formula One testing, not the shakedown that we had a couple of weeks ago in Barcelona. This is official testing held in Bahrain. And we're going to go through a few things that we learned. First, a little bit of a thank you. You may have seen some posts on our social media, and we did a post on YouTube as well, just to say thank you to everybody, because we hit a milestone for us here at View from Luffield. So we managed to hit 10,000 views of our YouTube video. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for watching the content. Thank you for liking the videos. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for getting involved in the conversation. Keep it coming. The videos will keep coming. And we are now, I think, just 18 days away from, 18 days as I film this, from the first Grand Prix in Australia. So everybody's starting to get incredibly excited about that. The build-up is coming. And we have, of course, this week of testing that we've just seen. And then we have another week of testing next week. And we will review that for you too. So let's get into it. What have we learned from this week? Sorry to interrupt this video. We hope you're enjoying it, and we'll send you straight back to it in just 1 minute. But we have spoke for the last couple of weeks on how you can get your hands on the trading card with Jacques Villeneuve's Race 1 suit. So here is how you can get your hands on that prize.
Okay, firstly, I want you to like and subscribe this video. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe. After that, will you go check out DT on this link down here? When it comes up, it should be up.
Yeah, it'll be there. It'll be there. Yep, it'll be edited in.
And
comment on this video and on any of our videos between now and the Australian Grand Prix. Make sure to comment DT Collects. It is written on the screen below you. That's DT Collects to get yourself in with a chance of winning the prize. And now back to the video. Well, I touched on Max Verstappen had a little bit of a whinge and was told to retire. All right, I may have catfished a little bit because it was a whimsical, tongue-in-cheek comment from Lando Norris. But on Max Verstappen, so there has been a few complaints from Verstappen that these new Formula One cars, with obviously the new regulations that we've all been talking quite a lot about, Max has kind of complained that there is a lot more management required, and that's inevitable. We're on a 50-50 split now with the power supply. So it was inevitable, certainly at the first stage of testing, that there will be a lot more management. These teams are still trying to get a grip of what these cars do, what they are. And Verstappen has taken unkindly to those changes, let's say, in quite a tongue-in-cheek response to that. Lando Norris has told him if he doesn't like it, he should retire. I imagine Lando's probably not the only one that wouldn't mind it if Max Verstappen retired. As for us as fans, Max, please stay. You give us the entertainment and it makes a competition. But it's interesting, Max isn't the only one that's made these complaints. Lando Norris himself actually did say that these cars had more of a Formula 2 feel to them than a Formula 1. What has been quite interesting from this week in testing, whilst we believe that the drivers and the teams are still getting a grip on what these cars are, we haven't seen a great deal of reliability issues, and that is a surprise to me. It's incredibly encouraging that we might not see much of it in the season as it goes. There was a few teams that did a lot of long running, specifically Ferrari. I'll touch on that whilst Phil's not here. I will do a little bit of Ferrari. I was going to say Ferrari touching. I don't know if that's the right word, but I will touch on Ferrari because they have done a lot of long running in this first week of testing in Bahrain. And what's also quite interesting to know is that Ferrari have done that long running on the same power unit that they had in the shakedown in Barcelona. What I'm getting at and why that's quite encouraging is that's a lot of miles on the one power unit. The majority of the teams have replaced the power unit that they used in Barcelona. Not necessarily gotten rid of it, but they put that to one side, whereas Ferrari have continued to do the Bahrain test on that same power unit. It will not be the same power unit, of course, that they bring to Australia. And I would imagine that they'll put a new one in for the second week of tests next week. Why that's encouraging for Ferrari is to do all that long running and have no reliability issues. Not only is it encouraging for Ferrari, I would argue there's also an element of encouragement for Haas and for Cadillac as well, who are, of course, coming into 2026 with Ferrari power units. So, all encouraging in a world of Ferrari. Their pace, however, they were a little bit off it. But I don't think anybody of a red Italian prancing horse persuasion will be surprised to hear that they're a little bit off the pace. Again, there's not a great deal that we can read from testing. And if you've seen Phil's video, the short that we put out in the week, just explaining basically what testing is, you will hear that Phil explains that you will hear that Phil explains that there isn't a great deal that we can really get from the times in testing. You are looking more to see that these reliability clinks and clunks aren't a part of what the teams are going to take into the first Grand Prix. And for Ferrari's point of view, at least, I would say that they can quite comfortably tick that off as that is a gremlin they shouldn't have to worry about. I'm saying shouldn't. I don't want to tempt any fate. I don't want Phil sitting there next to me when we're talking about Australia saying that it was my fault that they didn't finish the race. Just kidding. Just kidding. Moving on then briefly, we will go back to Red Bull just briefly because Max Verstappen, as we said, has had his complaints about the car. What's interesting, though, is George Russell has come out and said that the advantage that the Red Bull team have, in his words, is pretty scary. What we've seen from Red Bull is that they have got pace. I think Max was quickest on the first morning. Don't quote me on that because I haven't actually... I know that Red Bull were quickest. I'm sure it was the first morning that Max was quickest. And it's quite interesting that even from that, Mercedes are the team that are saying that the advantage that Red Bull have is pretty scary, especially when you consider... and if you were to look, which I have, and I've done my research, the testing time, so this is accumulated over the entire test. This isn't day one, this isn't day two, this is the entire accumulated. Is the two quickest cars were actually Kimi Antonelli with a 1:33.6 and George Russell with a 1:33.9. That's about 3/10 quicker, or Russell is 3/10 quicker than third place over the run of it all, which was Ferrari. As I said, positive signs for Ferrari because of the long running, as we mentioned. Now, again, times you can't really read a great deal into it, but Max Verstappen overall was seventh, a full second behind Kimi Antonelli. We don't want to, like I say, we don't want to give too much into this. Mercedes have actually responded and said, Toto Wolff has said that they actually need to pull the finger out and that they basically have work to do. On the evidence of week one, that's not necessarily the case, but we don't know, again, how aggressive these teams have been with the setup. What I'm looking at now doesn't tell me what tyres that these teams were using for these. We haven't seen a great deal of running on the softs. That's inevitable. You won't necessarily see in testing. So there is a lot of people trying to get to grips with this. The early signs, though, for me, certainly for Ferrari and Mercedes, are quite positive. Mercedes 1 and 2, Ferrari 3 and 4, and especially when you consider that long running that Ferrari have done. So Mercedes may potentially be hiding a little bit of pace. Toto Wolff thinks that they need to improve. On the evidence of it, they've been quick. So interesting to see what happens with that Mercedes one. There is a lot of people saying George Russell is the bookies' favourites at this early stage to win the World Drivers' Championship. It is a little bit preposterous to suggest that 19, 18 days away from the first race even starting. However, positive signs so far from Mercedes. And positive signs for me, because as much as I'm not personally a George Russell fan, I would love to see Phil have to do an episode with a George Russell hat. Remember, that is the promise. If George Russell wins the World Championship, Phil will buy a George Russell hat and do the episode in it. So, come on, George. Moving slightly down, let's touch on McLaren very quickly because they've kind of been a little bit, I wouldn't say anonymous, but they haven't really done anything this week that's really shook the groundworks. Lando Norris was quickest on the I think it was the second day in the morning, and overall he was sixth quickest over the whole week of testing. Oscar Piastri ahead of him in fifth. Not exactly ripping the world alight from the two-time Constructors' World Champions. However, there is still a positive to suggest that McLaren are just quietly going about their business. From my point of view, I'm not concerned. We'll see what the second week does. And of course, the first week of Australia, the first Grand Prix in Australia. What this is telling us so far, though, is that the top four look like they will be the top four again. And it's up to everybody else to put the pressure on them and to jump into that top four. One of the teams looking to do that have not made a very good start. Aston Martin. 4.5 seconds off the pace of the lead teams on one of the days of testing. Fernando Alonso has been incredibly critical of this new Aston Martin. He was reported to have taken off his gloves and thrown them to the ground in anger when coming out of the car, purely citing that it's just a mess. It's a horrible, horrible mess. It's a surprise to hear that something Adrian Newey has put together is such a mess. We did say, or I did say on the episode, that this could either be a rocket ship that takes everybody apart, or he could got it catastrophically wrong. Early indications are that it's the latter. He's got this catastrophically wrong. It's Adrian Newey. There's something here that we're not quite seeing. There is something missing. Or our Aston Martin just purely pulling the wool over our eyes and hiding something from us. Maybe. Because Adrian Newey doesn't give a bad car. Fernando Alonso is not a bad driver, though I have criticised him in the past for maybe being past it. He's not a bad driver. Adrian Newey is a god. There's something we're not quite seeing, or there's something that's not quite clicking with Aston Martin. But to be 4.5 seconds off the pace on one of the days of testing is very, very concerning. We may see Aston Martin start the season a little bit off in comparison to everybody else, but don't be surprised to see that gradually get better and better and eventually be one of those teams. It may just work out to be a little bit late in the season for them to push into the top four potentially, but keep an eye on Aston Martin, because if this is how bad they're going to start the season, I can almost guarantee it won't be that bad by the time we get to Silverstone around halfway through the season. But still on Aston Martin, just very quickly, because a little quote that did make me laugh. Fernando Alonso, not happy with how slow you have to go through turn 12, specifically on the Bahrain circuit. It's always been a problematic corner, but not happy with how much you have to manage through that corner now. Saying, and I quote, the chef could drive the car. We don't know who the chef is. The Aston Martin chef may very well be someone with the ability to do so. So, it could be Mick Schumacher, and in which case that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I don't think Aston Martin's chef is Mick Schumacher, and I do think that that's Fernando Alonso joining in with Max Verstappen's criticality. The ironic thing is, though, is Fernando Alonso was actually one of the drivers in a later comment defending the new regulations against Max Verstappen's, let's call it an attack, defending it against that and saying that this is just Formula One, this is just the way it goes, it develops. And obviously a lot of the things that you see in Formula One become part of the technology that we use in our road cars. So inevitably they were going to go to this hybrid route. Everybody has either hybrids or electric cars these days. So inevitably it was going to go that way. Fernando Alonso has been quite defensive of it, just not specifically around turn 12. So sort of half agreeing with Max that there's too much management, half disagreeing with him that it's making it interesting and it's making it exciting. Now, the last point I want to bring up before we wrap up this video, because I am aware that there's probably a lot of rambling on my part, and that's fine, because I'm a rambler. Now, Audi. Very, very interesting what Audi have done here, and I have got my research in front of me on the screen, so I'm going to kind of just see what Audi have done. Audi have come with some quite aggressively new side pods. There's an image on your screen right now. The difference between the side pods that they ran in the shakedown in Barcelona and the side pods that they're running in Bahrain for this week. Now, as you can see, the inlets have been made more smaller and more vertical. Somewhat similar, what is quite interesting, if anybody picks this up in the comments, something quite interesting is that they are quite similar to the failed attempt that Mercedes did back around 22, something like that. Someone might correct me. I think it was 22. And it's quite interesting that Audi have completely changed the side pods, and that was what Shakedown was for. So Audi, arguably, are one of the teams that have really changed what they've done between Shakedown and the official first test. And there's going to be another image on your screen now, because Audi have done something else quite interesting. They have come with a completely different front wing design. So as well as some tweaks to the front flat profiles, It's got two large housings, and we're not entirely sure exactly what adjustment this will do for Audi. It's going to be quite interesting to see. We don't have any official timings, of course, from Shakedown Week in Barcelona. Their official timings from this, and I'm just looking at them now, that puts Nico Hulkenberg in 11th place with a 1:36.2. And Gabby Bortoleto was in 13th, just 4 tenths behind him, a 1:36.6. So it's interesting that Audi have taken what they've learned from Shakedown, completely reshaped the side pods, completely reshaped the front wing, and they've come with something very, very interesting. And that is it for me today. So just a very, very quick, brief overview of what we have learned so far. Mercedes look quick, and apparently they could get quicker if Toto Wolff's comments are to be believed. Aston Martin are nowhere near the pace in this early stage. It's going to be interesting to see how they react for week 2. Ferrari doing some long runs and also managing some pretty decent pace over the first week of testing. So some positive signs for Ferrari. McLaren seemingly quietly going about their business down in 5th and 6th in the overall timings. Not exactly entirely sure whether McLaren. What's interesting is actually Mercedes have said about McLaren is that they're difficult to read. So I don't know, that's quite a mystic thing about McLaren. And Red Bull, George Russell saying that their advantage is pretty scary, word for word. And however, Mercedes have beaten them on the early pace in week 1. And that is it for me today. Join us next week where we'll have a quick review of what we saw in week 2 in Bahrain testing. But for me, for now, see you later.